They called him Samson because no chain could hold him. But on that cold Thanksgiving night in 1857, even God turned his face away from Little Rock. The candles burned low. The house was too quiet. And the smell of roasted turkey mixed with the stench of fear. Colonel William McGraw sat at the head of the long mahogany table. His rings gleamed under the golden light. His voice carried power, cruelty, and bourbon. "Another toast," he said, slamming his glass down. "Another year of blessings." Around him sat his guests, planters, soldiers, and their jeweled wives. Laughter echoed through the plantation house. Outside, the wind hissed against the shutters, and behind McGraw stood Samson, 6.5 feet tall, muscles cut from years of chains and cotton, eyes dark as storm clouds, silent, still, watching. He was the one who poured the wine, the one who carved the turkey, the one who'd buried his mother behind the barn last winter. After McGraw's overseer taught her obedience, that same overseer sat 2 seats away, chewing like a hog, laughing like the devil. Every time his laughter echoed, Samson's hand twitched. "Samson!" McGraw barked. "Bring more wine, boy." Samson obeyed. He always did. The silver tray trembled in his hands, not from fear, but from something boiling deep in his chest, a pressure that had been building for years. Every whip crack, every scream, every Sunday prayer where freedom was preached but never given. The guests didn't notice his shaking. They were too busy talking about crops and profit, about slaves and harvests, about God's blessings. The only one who noticed Samson was Sarah. She was the housemaid, barefoot, eyes tired, hands scarred. Their eyes met for a second, 1 second too long, and McGraw saw it. His voice cut through the room like a blade. "What you looking at, boy?" The laughter died. Every fork froze. Every eye turned. Samson lowered his head. "Nothing, sir." McGraw stood. His chair screeched across the wood. He stepped closer, face red, lips wet with rage. "Nothing?" he growled. "You looking at my property?" Sarah's breath hitched. Samson's jaw clenched. The room waited. McGraw's hand shot out, a slap sharp and cruel, echoing like thunder. "Answer me when I speak to you, boy." Samson didn't move, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Something inside him broke, not a bone, not a muscle, something deeper. He looked up, and for the first time in his life, he looked McGraw straight in the eyes. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't touch her again." The room went silent. Only the fire popped. McGraw blinked, then laughed. A sick, mocking sound. "You forget your place, Samson?" Samson didn't answer. He didn't have to. McGraw swung. The punch landed hard, but Samson didn't fall. The guests gasped. Sarah screamed. Samson caught McGraw's wrist, and in one movement, one brutal, unstoppable movement, he twisted. A crack tore through the silence. The sound of bone giving way. Then another. McGraw's neck snapped. His body dropped like a sack of corn. The colonel of Little Rock was dead. For a second, nobody moved. The fire hissed. The wine spilled across the white tablecloth like blood. Samson stood over the body, his breath heavy, his hands shaking, his eyes wet. Sarah whispered, "Lord, help us." The overseer lunged. Samson swung. A single punch. The overseer's jaw shattered. Teeth scattered like dice. Panic erupted. Chairs toppled. Women screamed. Men ran. Samson turned toward Sarah. "Run," he said. Now she hesitated. He grabbed her arm. "Go!" She fled down the hallway, bare feet on the wooden floor. The sound fading into the night. Samson stood alone, the master's body at his feet, the room burning with chaos. He looked at his hands, the hands that had picked cotton, built fences, buried his kin, the hands that had just broken the unbreakable. He whispered to himself, "I'm done being a slave." Outside, thunder rolled. Rain began to fall. He stepped out into the storm, shirt torn, chains clinking at his wrists. Behind him, the mansion roared with screams and firelight. He walked into the fields, where freedom waited, and death followed close behind. That night, a legend was born. The slaves whispered his name. The whites cursed it. But everyone remembered the sound, that one, perfect final snap, the sound that shook Little Rock to its bones, the sound of a man reclaiming his soul. If this story gave you chills, hit share to spread it, comment your thoughts on Samson's choice, and subscribe for next, where the bone breaker becomes the hunted. They found the colonel's body face down in his own blood, his neck bent like a broken branch, and the man who did it had vanished into the dark Arkansas rain. Thunder rattled the shutters. The mansion groaned like it was morning, but the only sound that truly filled the halls was the screaming, "Find him!" That was the first order that came from McGraw's brother, a man named Sheriff Darius McGraw, a lawman with the same cruelty but none of his brother's charm. He arrived before dawn, riding through the storm with 6 deputies. Their boots splashed through mud, their torches burned through the dark. When they saw the colonel's body, even the storm seemed to quiet. His head turned completely backward, his jaw still open, eyes staring into nothing. One deputy whispered, "Lord, have mercy." But Darius didn't. He looked at the corpse, then at the frightened house slaves kneeling in the corner. "Which one of y'all helped him?" Nobody spoke. Only Sarah trembled, hands folded, eyes red from crying. He pointed at her. "You, come here." Sarah rose slowly. Her bare feet left prints of blood and water on the floor. "You seen him kill my brother?" She hesitated. I saw the colonel raise his hand first." A silence heavier than thunder. The deputies shifted. Darius's jaw tightened. Then came the slap, hard, sudden, cruel. "Don't you lie for that animal," he growled. "You tell me where he went." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I don't know, sir." He grabbed her chin, forced her to look him in the eye. "You will." Outside, dogs barked. Chains rattled. Every slave from the quarters was dragged into the yard. Rain poured. Lightning flashed. The earth turned to red mud beneath their knees. Darius stood on the porch, hat dripping, pistol at his side. "Listen close," he shouted. "The man who murdered my brother will hang before the week is done." He pointed to the field. "He can't get far. Not in this storm, not in these woods. And whoever's hiding him will hang right beside him." The crowd stayed silent. Only the wind answered. Darius raised his hand. A whip cracked through the rain. A scream followed. "Start talking." Another crack, another scream, but no one spoke Samson's name. No one betrayed the man who'd broken their chains even for a moment. Miles away, deep in the swamp, Samson stumbled through the mud. Each breath burned, each step felt heavier. He could still hear the screams behind him. The storm muffled the dogs, but he knew they'd come. His hands trembled from the cold. His shirt was torn. Blood soaked his sleeve from where a bullet had grazed him during his escape. He leaned against a cypress tree, eyes scanning the black water, the thick mist. He whispered to himself, "She's safe." She got out. He hoped Sarah made it to the woods, that she was hiding somewhere dry. But the truth gnawed at him. People like her didn't stay safe for long. He looked at his reflection in the swamp water. The man staring back wasn't the same man who'd poured wine hours ago. His eyes looked wild, haunted, free. He thought of his mother's grave. He thought of the beatings, the chains, the endless picking under the burning sun. And he whispered again, "I ain't going back." A branch snapped behind him. He froze, listened. Then came the sound. Dogs barking in the distance, getting closer. He took off running, feet splashing through water, branches clawing at his skin. The dogs howled louder, men shouted orders, torches flickered through the fog. Samson reached a fallen tree and crawled beneath it, pressing his body into the mud. The water rose to his neck. He held his breath as torches passed above him. The hounds sniffed, growled, then moved on. He waited until the sounds faded, then slowly crawled out. His chains clinked softly as he moved. Lightning flashed, and for a split second he saw it. A small cabin in the distance, light flickering from inside. He hesitated. Could be a trap, could be shelter. He took the chance. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, an old woman sat by the fire, humming a hymn that trembled through the silence. Her skin was dark, her hair silver. When she looked up, her eyes didn't show fear, only recognition. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. Samson froze. You know me?" She nodded. "Everybody knows you now. Word travels fast when a man kills the devil himself." He stepped closer. "I didn't do it for fame." "I know," she said. "You did it 'cause your soul couldn't take no more." She pointed to the corner. "Sit, rest, you bleeding." He sat down, hands shaking, body heavy. The woman cleaned his wound with herbs and whiskey. She worked in silence for a while, then whispered, "They'll hunt you till the earth swallows you." "I figured," Samson said. She looked him in the eyes. "You ready to die for what you did?" He didn't answer. Not right away. Then quietly, "If dying means I die free, then yes." The woman nodded slowly. "You remind me of someone I knew. My boy. They took him 10 years ago. Never saw him again." Her hands trembled as she tied his bandage. When she finished, she gave him a piece of cornbread and whispered, "There's a path behind the cabin. Follow it till the river bends. Cross it and head north. There's a camp of freedmen near the ridge. They'll help you." Samson looked at her with gratitude. "Why help me?" She smiled faintly. "'Cause every chain you break makes mine feel lighter." By dawn, the rain stopped. Steam rose from the wet earth, and from miles away the sound of dogs returned. The posse was closing in. Back at the plantation, Darius McGraw saddled his horse. The overseer, jaw broken and face bandaged, pointed toward the woods. "He's heading north, Sheriff, through the swamp." Darius spat his tobacco into the mud. "Then we'll smoke him out." He turned to his men. "Load the rifles. We ride till we find his bones." The hounds barked, pulling at their chains. The sun rose red behind the trees. The hunt had begun, and somewhere deep in the shadows of the Arkansas swamp, Samson walked barefoot through the mist, carrying the weight of every broken soul that had ever cried for freedom. The mud swallowed his tracks. The birds went silent, and the legend of the bone breaker began to grow. If you felt the storm in this part, hit share so Samson's story spreads farther. Comment your thoughts. Would you have run or fought? And subscribe now, because in the next the hunters enter Hell's Hollow, and not all of them make it out alive. The swamp had a heartbeat, and tonight the hunters would learn the bone breaker doesn't run. He waits. Darius McGraw's posse moved like shadows through the cypress swamp. Hounds yipped and growled, chains rattling in the wet mud. The rain had stopped, but mist clung to every branch, turning the forest into a ghost world. "Spread out," Darius shouted, voice sharp as a whip. "Don't let him slip." The men obeyed, every step a splash, every snap of a twig a warning. Somewhere ahead, Samson watched. Feet planted in mud, eyes hidden behind the dark sheen of rainwater and shadow. He didn't run. He waited. The first man to step too close, a young deputy named Harris, screamed before anyone even saw what hit him. A massive fist smashed through his chest. The sound echoed like a cannon. The men froze. Harris's body crumpled into the mud. The hounds whimpered, sensing the danger. "Who, what?" One deputy shouted, "Keep moving." Darius yelled, but his voice trembled. A tree branch snapped behind them. A shadow moved like liquid. Then another man fell, jerking, eyes wide, a broken arm and ribs crushed. Samson moved with the precision of a predator. He was every wound inflicted on him, every whip crack, every chain he'd carried, every scream of the enslaved. He carried it all. He didn't kill for pleasure. He killed for survival. And warning, the men realized too late they weren't hunting a man. They were walking into a nightmare. Hours passed. Mud stained their clothes. Rain returned in sudden sheets. The swamp seemed alive. Branches reached like hands. The fog whispered secrets of the lost and dead. Darius gritted his teeth. "Spread out! Find him before night!" But the swamp had swallowed 2 men already. Bones snapped. Torches went out. Screams muffled by fog, and all the while Samson watched from above, a ridge over the river bend. He saw their strategy, their fear, their arrogance. He remembered the feasts, the chains, the blood-stained floorboards of the mansion. He remembered his mother's screams, the overseer's teeth broken under his fist. He was not a man who would be caught. By midnight, Darius and the remaining men reached a clearing. The ground was littered with crushed bones of animals, dogs, cattle, even a raccoon. Some had been broken so perfectly it was almost ceremonial. Darius frowned. This ain't natural. One of the men whispered, "Sheriff, maybe he's not just a man. Maybe it's the devil." Darius spat in disgust. Superstitious nonsense. "We'll find him. He's just a man." But even he hesitated, glancing at the twisted shapes in the fog. Then came a scream. Closer than before. Piercing, human, desperate, the men ran. They ran blindly, stumbling through roots and mud. Samson appeared in their path, a wall of muscle and rage. Hands like iron, eyes like burning coals. One swing of his fist, and a deputy went flying into the swamp. Another tried to fire a rifle. Samson grabbed it mid-air and crushed it like twigs. Darius raised his pistol. The flash lit Samson's face. For a moment, Darius saw humanity and rage combined into something unstoppable. He fired. The bullet hit Samson's shoulder. He grunted, blood spilling, but he didn't fall. Another flash. Another shot. Samson lunged. The remaining men ran screaming into the darkness. Darius alone, staring, hands shaking. "Heart hammering, Samson," he whispered. "You're a monster." Samson didn't answer. He stepped into the shadows, disappearing like smoke. Hours later, Darius limped back to the town. Half his men missing. The others mangled. Word spread fast. The legend grew. The bone breaker of Little Rock could appear anywhere. He could vanish anywhere. No chain, no bullet, no sword could stop him. Some claimed he walked through the swamp at night, eyes glowing red, breaking the bones of animals, hunters, and even the greedy. Others whispered that the swamp itself protected him, that the trees hid him, that the mud swallowed his enemies whole. Children slept with knives under pillows. Farmers stayed inside after dusk. And the McGraw plantation. They dared not enter the swamp. Samson returned to the cabin of the old woman. She had waited. She didn't flinch when he limped through the door. "Bad night," she said simply. Samson sank into a chair, bleeding, exhausted. "They're hunting me," he said. "They'll never stop." "They won't," she admitted. "But neither will you." He stared at the fire. For a long time he didn't speak. Then softly, "I'm not just fighting them. I'm fighting every chain they put on people like me. Every lie they tell. Every whip they swing," the woman nodded. "You'll have to go further, north, far from here, where freedom has begun to bloom." Samson stood. He looked toward the swamp, the rising mist, the path ahead, and in that moment he wasn't just Samson. He was a shadow, a warning, a living legend. The bone breaker of Little Rock would not be tamed. If this part sent chills down your spine, hit share so the legend spreads. Comment your thoughts. Could you face a man like Samson? And subscribe now, because in X the bone breaker becomes a myth, and the swamp hides horrors no one dares to name. Some say he's dead, some say he's gone, but in the swamps of Little Rock, the bone breaker waits, watching, always hungry for justice. Winter fell hard on Little Rock. The wind sliced through the trees. Frost crept over the river like a pale hand. And the swamp whispered. People said Samson was gone. The hunters claimed he'd vanished into the night. But the truth was far darker. Children dared each other to enter the swamp. They never returned. Farmers swore their livestock had bones snapped overnight. Dogs fled into the woods, never to return. The bone breaker had become a story, a warning, a ghost. Inside the town, the McGraw name still carried power, but fear had replaced pride. Darius McGraw walked with a limp, each step a reminder of that fateful night. He could not sleep, not with the hounds howling in the distance, not with whispers of Samson echoing in his dreams. "Your brother is gone," one neighbor said. "His blood cries from the ground," Darius spat. "No, he's alive. I'll find him." But the truth was, the swamp had claimed Samson, and the swamp did not forgive. Samson walked alone, barefoot through frozen mud. His wounds had healed, but the memory of broken ribs and bullet grazes stayed. He carried nothing but his rage and a piece of cornbread from the old woman. Every night he hunted, not for food, not for glory, for survival, and for justice. Deer, dogs, pigs, all fell victim to his wrath. Bones snapped under his hands or teeth. The swamp seemed to guide him. A tree would bend, a branch would fall, an animal would scream, and he would know exactly where to strike. He became more than a man. He became the swamp itself. Word of the Bonebreaker spread beyond Little Rock. Travelers spoke in whispers. Merchants refused to cross the swamp. Even other plantations warned their workers, "Do not go near the cypress water. Samson walks there." Some claimed he could sense fear. He would appear out of the mist, a shadow with fists of iron, eyes glowing under the moonlight, bones shattered before screams even began. Others said he could talk to the animals. The hounds of hunters would turn against their masters. Birds would guide him. Even the wind carried his message, and the legend grew. In the woods, the old woman waited. She had fed him. She had tended his wounds. She had spoken to him about freedom, about survival, about rage transformed into power. "Samson," she said one night, "people fear what they do not understand, and you are the swamp's justice. But beware. Anger is a hunger that never fills." Samson nodded, eyes dark as night. "I know, but if I stop, they win. Every chain, every lash, every family torn apart. I cannot stop." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're a legend now, not just in Little Rock, but in the stories people will whisper long after you're gone." He stared at the fire. The shadows danced, and he knew she was right. Back in town, the McGraw plantation decayed. The fields were empty. Cattle had vanished. And on the rare nights the fog rolled in, torches flickered in the distance. Figures moved in the mist, and screams echoed through the trees. People began to leave, families sold their land, merchants closed shop. Even the sheriff admitted defeat. The Bonebreaker had won, not just against Darius, not just against McGraw's men, but against the fear of being powerless. And yet, the swamp demanded more. Samson didn't see himself as a monster. He saw himself as a reckoning. Each hunter, each overseer, each man who claimed dominion over another. He punished. The swamp whispered his name. It carried him. It hid him. It protected him. He was no longer just Samson. He was a story, a nightmare, a warning. Some nights he would return to the cabin. The old woman would greet him. "Too many lives lost?" she asked. Samson shook his head. "Not enough. Not yet. As long as chains exist, as long as men think power comes from fear, I will be here." The fire flickered in the night. He stared at it, then at the swamp. A branch cracked in the distance. A shadow moved. He smiled. The Bonebreaker was awake, and he was watching. The legend spread beyond whispers. Travelers told stories of a man who could crush bones with a single hand. People spoke of him as if he were both man and ghost. Some called him Samson, others just the Bonebreaker. No one dared enter the swamp at night, and those who tried rarely returned. The myth grew, fueled by fear, by truth, and by the memory of a Thanksgiving night that shattered a plantation and gave birth to a legend. If the legend of Samson gave you chills, hit share to spread the story. Comment your thoughts. Would you face the Bonebreaker in the swamp? And subscribe now, because in next, the Bonebreaker returns to the plantation, and revenge becomes personal. The McGraw plantation had burned, but the embers didn't tell the whole story. Samson was coming back, and this time the reckoning would be personal. It had been months since the swamp swallowed the hunters. Snow melted into mud, and spring crept slowly over Little Rock. The town dared to breathe again. The McGraw mansion stood in ruins, charred beams, broken windows and scorched earth. But fear never left. The slaves who remained whispered. They spoke of shadows moving along the tree line, of glowing eyes in the darkness, and of the man who had once snapped a master's neck and disappeared into the swamp. Samson had healed, muscles hardened. Every scar, every wound, every bruise was a reminder. And every night he returned to the mansion. He came silently, like mist slipping through the broken gates. The charred walls groaned as he moved past. He remembered the table, the feast, the laughter. He remembered the smell of blood, the terror of women and children, the panic of men who thought they could control the world with chains. And he remembered Darius. The sheriff had survived, limping through the swamp, spreading rumors, claiming Samson was a monster, a ghost, a curse. Samson's hands clenched. He did not move for glory. He moved for justice. He moved for vengeance. Darius had gathered a small militia. Some were hired hunters. Some were surviving family. They patrolled the perimeter, torches in hand, rifles loaded, swearing they would not let the bonebreaker touch the plantation again. They did not know he was already inside. A floorboard creaked. A shadow moved. A chill ran through the men's spines. "Did you hear that?" one muttered. "Probably a fox," said another. But none were convinced. Then came the sound, a bone snapping under pressure. Men turned. The first hunter went down. A single swing of Samson's massive arm. A rib shattered. He fell screaming into the mud. The others fired blindly. Bullets whistled past Samson. But he didn't falter. He moved like a storm. A shadow with fists of iron, each strike precise, each blow a message. The militia tried to surround him. But the swamp had taught Samson patience. He led them into the charred remains of the barn. A trap. One by one they fell, bones crushed, screams echoing, torches flickering over bodies twisted in mud and blood. Darius watched from a broken wall, heart pounding, teeth gritted. "Samson," he whispered. "You'll pay for this." Samson stepped into the light. Rain had begun again, soaking him to the skin. His fists were ready. His eyes were cold. "You don't understand," Samson said quietly. "Every chain you ever held, every lash you swung, every family you tore apart. I'm that reckoning," Darius fired. The bullet grazed Samson's shoulder. He barely flinched. Then Samson lunged. The sheriff barely dodged. But the bonebreaker was faster, stronger, more than any man they'd ever known. A single strike shattered Darius's arm. Another broke his leg. He fell to the floor, screaming in agony. Samson stood over him. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He whispered, "This is for my mother, for every slave who never saw freedom, for every chain you thought you held forever." And then he disappeared into the fog. The plantation was silent. Only the hounds barked, lost in the mud. The militia was gone. The sheriff limped, broken, muttering about a ghost. No one dared rebuild. No one dared return. The bonebreaker had claimed the land. Samson returned to the old woman's cabin. She had prepared a meal of corn and stew. He ate silently, muscles tense, mind alert. "You've done enough for tonight," she said. "You've sent your message," he nodded. "But it's not over. Not until they stop believing they own us. Not until no one thinks a man can be a chain." She looked at him with tired eyes. "Then you'll keep fighting." "I will," he said quietly. "And if they try again, I'll be waiting." By the next morning, the town knew the bonebreaker had returned. Stories spread like wildfire. Ben claimed he was a shadow moving through the fog. Women whispered that the night air carried his footsteps. Children cried at the mention of his name. The McGraw plantation remained a ruin. The swamp claimed it, and Samson was somewhere out there, watching, waiting. The legend of the bonebreaker was no longer just a story. It was a warning, and Little Rock would never forget. If this revenge sent chills through your bones, hit share so everyone knows the bonebreaker's name. Comment your thoughts. Would you survive the swamp? And subscribe now, because in next, the final truth emerges, and the secrets buried under Little Rock are revealed. Years passed. The swamp fell silent. But the truth was buried beneath Little Rock, waiting to be uncovered. Decades later, the Civil War had ended. The plantations lay in ruin. The McGraw family was scattered, their power broken. Construction crews arrived to rebuild the town. Digging through mud and clay, their shovels struck something hard, a rusted chain, bones, a human skeleton twisted and broken. The workers froze. Whispers spread through the crew. This can't be right. The sheriff at the time was called. He knelt beside the bones. One wrist still bore a shackle. The size was massive, impossible to ignore. Beside it, a journal. Pages faded, edges crumbling. The journal belonged to Samson. Or at least, it was written in his hand. He wrote of pain, of chains that cut deep, of mothers, fathers, brothers and sisters stolen. He wrote of the night he snapped the colonel's neck, of every step through the swamp, of every hunter who fell, but most importantly, he wrote the truth. He had not killed for pleasure. He had not become a monster. He had become the reckoning. The swamp had protected him, the forest had guided him, and the world had nearly forgotten the cost of cruelty. The journal told of his final return to the McGraw plantation, of Darius limping, wounded, pleading, of the militia crushed, of his vow to protect the innocent. Samson had not sought fame. He had sought justice, and in the final pages, he spoke of hope. If one man can break chains, then another can follow. If one man can defy the masters, then another can reclaim freedom. The workers looked at the bones with unease. Some swore they heard movement in the trees. The wind whispered through the cypress branches. Some said they saw a shadow, tall and broad, watching from the swamp. The legend was not just a story, it was real. And it lived in the land itself. Historians later examined the journal. They verified the dates. The events matched accounts from surviving townsfolk. Samson, the bone breaker, had been real. The swamp had claimed him, then returned his story to the earth. People debated his methods. Some called him a hero, some a monster, but all agreed on one thing. His strength, courage, and refusal to be a slave left a mark on history that could not be erased. Local legend says that on stormy nights, if you walk near the old McGraw ruins, you can hear the snapping of bones. Not human bones, but the echo of justice. Some say Samson walked still, not as a man, not as a ghost, but as a warning, a reminder that cruelty has consequences, that chains, no matter how strong, can be broken, and that the bone breaker of Little Rock will never be forgotten. If Samson's story gave you chills and left your heart racing, share this legend so everyone knows the bone breaker's name. Comment what you think about his journey, hero or monster. And subscribe now for more dark, haunting tales from history that refuse to be forgotten.